Hey, friends.
Do we have Ray today, or is that why you posted the meeting info?
Kevin, no. Ray, maybe. I'm in charge of kicking things off, and I'm a minute late. Sorry.
Okay.
We were doing. My wife and I just murdered about 50 flies that seemed to have laid eggs in the house. It was a real bloodbath in there.
Oh no.
Hey, Ray. So why don't we get started? Just to keep the habit of starting on time. Have the minutes been updated since the last time I showed up?
Quite possibly not.
Yeah, it looks like there's a hiring update that's out of date because I didn't delete that from the minutes. Hooray. We're past the second round of interviews now. And do we have analyst updates from Gretchen?
Not really. Sorry, I hadn't looked at the agenda. I just thought I'd show up.
Yeah, no, you're welcome to dive in. I just think everyone else here is on the dev side, and we usually start with the analyst side with Toli or anyone else who's here.
Cool.
Welcome.
Sorry.
Okay. In that case, let's move on to developer updates. What do you got, Rob?
Now that I'm back from lots of traveling and other issues, got a little bit of stuff done this week. So Dan, you spoke to me about some follow-on improvements to LinkStiff that had been ready to merge for a while and nobody clicked the merge button. So that's merged and deployed now. In the process of deploying, that reminded me to do more remediation about the alerts from the servers yesterday, which I posted about separately, and you know about, but also that feeds into the PR you posted the other night about pinning versions and how it's failing because the versions you have on your machine actually aren't compatible with the current version of the software anymore. And somehow, magically, it does still run with Tornado 4, and I don't remember what parts of error handling or whatever fail with Tornado 4. So I just updated all the servers when I was deploying to Tornado 5.
That's a big change. I don't know that for sure this is the reason that affects us.
Well, it is required for the test to pass.
Okay, they maybe already know this, but Tornado 5 runs the event loop on, I think, on import.
I didn't. You still have to start it.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's that it's using the async IO event loop. So yeah, anything else that's using that event loop is
the async IO event loop. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I guess the right way to handle that pinning issue is just to probably use what we have in production right now as something that we know works.
I would try flipping to what we have in production because the only thing I updated was Tornado.
Yeah.
And see if that is what we need for tests to pass. But otherwise, I put down what I had locally. But yeah. We got because that Google Summer of Code person started contributing stuff. Anybody, because we didn't have versions pinned before, anybody who installs it and tries to contribute new code is going to be installing way newer versions of dependencies than you probably have on your machine.
Right.
And may never realize that something they write is incompatible with an older version that we actually are deploying with.
Right.
Because we have no pinning and there's no reason they should be aware that it's breaking because it won't break when they run tests.
Right.
So also, like, you're making a PR about it definitely immediately exhibited the benefits of we need to be doing this.
Yep.
But anyway, long story short, I updated both diffing servers to Tornado 5 when I deployed the updated LinkStiff stuff. And I finally merged Kevin's old PR about removing the include versions argument, because all our different services are happily not using it anymore now. So that should be safe. And although I don't think I've deployed that update, but it is merged.
Maybe a little bit of context on that for Jason. So when it used to be that the queries for pages, as in like, tell me about this URL that we're tracking, could optionally include all information about all the snapshots, metadata about all the snapshots. And that obviously doesn't scale. So it used to be an option. I forget what the default was. Now it is not, I think, even an option.
It's all the pages, they're
Mm-hmm.
all ID'd by UUID, right? Like each snapshot of each page.
Yeah. So
Yes.
each snapshot of each page is in the database called a version. And yes.
I mean, it scales fine when pages only had 10 to 50 snapshots each. But now that they have many more, and now that they're going to have many, many more as we're bringing in Internet Archive stuff.
It's a very tall data structure to navigate.
Yeah,
Right.
You could ask for one page and get a result that has thousands of like records in it.
Right.
So we just disabled that entire feature. You can still pass include latest, which will include the single latest version for each page in the result set, but not include versions, because that would include all with no like paging on each one. And so that's infeasible. There's another issue hanging around about fully implement JSON API, which has a mechanism for representing paged sub-collections like that. But the way we were representing them didn't give us any nice way to do that. Plus, it's a whole lot of work to implement, and implement in a way that's not horrifyingly non-performant. So we're just disabling it for now, because you can achieve that need through other ends. And then to prepare for the DC Femtech Hackathon last weekend, I finally went through and updated the seed data to be something good instead of mostly filled with worthless stuff. So that was the other big thing. The deduplication issue of not having a single page show up in more than one analyst sheet, that came up Monday night at the analyst meeting. I got all that work done last night, so that's just awaiting review from somebody. And one of the people from the hackathon did submit a PR, which I reviewed, needs a lot more work, haven't heard anything back from them yet. And then there's a whole bunch of sort of high priority issues that I put for up next. One was sort of identified by people at the hackathon, which is we do have some old issues that point to a super old deployment of UI back when it was really nothing more than a prototype on Heroku, that I had been wondering forever, for months actually, where in DB's logs it was getting these weird malformed requests from. And that's where, whenever somebody finds that old issue and clicks the link to go to the wrong version of UI from literally a year and a half ago, it sends these malformed requests. So you need to replace that Heroku deployment with just a redirect to the current staging.
I'm so glad that mystery is solved.
Yeah.
Is someone evil trying to knock over our service? No, we're just dumb. That's
Yeah, because it was like, at first I thought it must be an automated process, but then it came in at all these random times, and like, maybe you'd get a couple, maybe you'd get like 10. And I was just like, what? Doesn't make any
Someone
sense.
is messing with you, Rob.
Yeah.
The call is coming from inside the house in the end.
Yeah,
of the
and it was coming from like an AWS, IP.
Right.
Anyway, so there's that. There are some pages that Marcy brought up just before the analyst meeting on Monday that are just blank white screens. And that is because they don't work without JavaScript, and their JavaScript throws an error before it finishes doing its work when it runs in a sandbox, as in our app. And the dumb way to fix that we can do straight away is to make that remove formatting checkbox also remove style attributes, because the specific thing happening on that page is that the body of the page has style opacity 0, so it's transparent. and it relies on JavaScript, once JavaScript has done all this work, to come along and say, now the page is visible. But if your browser doesn't support JavaScript, or if the JavaScript has an error somewhere along the way, or 5 million other possible situations, the page is just a blank screen. So the easiest thing is just to make that remove formatting box, remove those inline formatting bits, which seems like a reasonable thing to do. Right now it only removes style elements and links, so like style sheets that are inline or linked, but not actual like inline styles on elements. So changing that would make the page work when you click remove format.
I think that makes sense if there's some kind of visual indication still that the execution hasn't completed, that they haven't landed yet. That way they know, because I would imagine that that was probably set to 0 opacity, to keep the users from seeing a weird state.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's true. I think in general, the assumption is when you click the remove formatting button, like a lot of stuff's probably going to be weird. In the medium term run, I really don't know what to do to solve that problem any better. In the long term run, there is a whole issue about how we need to build an entire infrastructure about reserving and proxying all the contents of pages so that we don't have security issues, so that we can display them in a sandbox. And that won't even solve everything, because it won't solve if somebody makes an unguarded call to store a cookie or to store local storage content. But there's a giant pile of things to solve there. And like right now, we don't have the time or capacity for it. So just trying to solve what can we do right now? And then continuing the work on Internet Archive scraping, there's a whole giant about this lower down in the agenda. And I also want to take an hour and clean up and merge or just close the giant pile of outstanding PRs that Pat left on DB and never maintained or finished. And then I also, from Monday night's analyst discussion again, that Department of Interior page that we were looking at, I pulled it up in the CDX API during that meeting, which is why I was semi-distracted for part of it. And despite the fact that if you browse to the page, you get a 403 error or some flavor of 400 error. The CDX API lists them all since June 20th as being 503 status, which is service unavailable. So I need to make sure to ask in there to understand what the CDX API is attempting to actually show with that, because that seems like it's a different status than they're getting from the server. And ostensibly that field is supposed to be the status code that the server returned. So if it's not, that would be good to know and document somewhere. And then I wanted to bug you, Jason, if you're interested in taking the issue about documenting allowed archive hosts. And feel free to bug me if it doesn't make sense to you for what it is. And so you need to know what to write. And then when everybody's done with updates, if we have more time and there's interest, it might be worth talking about 175 in processing, which is a bug about all the dumb heuristics that we might be able to do to make comparing pages better for analysts. That's been floating around for a while, but it came up again at the analyst meeting on Monday, so it just might be worth revisiting and figuring out how to prioritize it, where it fits, etc. And that's it for me.
Just pausing to look at 175 linked there. I'm trying to remember what that was about. Okay.
It's basically ideas for rather than the machine learning magic that people keep wanting to do, what are the really dumb filters that we can do?
I see. Is that a comment from Jason there, in line with Rob's thing, -J.
Yep.
What's going on there?
Oh, well, I can't actually assign myself the issue because I'm not on the
Oh,
project.
okay. You can see it, but you're not a
Yeah,
contributor.
yeah.
I will fix that the minute that we're done talking.
You
But
should
yes.
you should have a GitHub invite email.
I may have
sent
just
it last night.
This is my first time back since Monday night.
Oh, okay.
I was wrapping Wikipedia for a month for month break yesterday. So
Cool.
Okay, great.
Yeah, just click the accept link and then you will be able to self-assign yourself.
Cool. Okay. Then I guess I'm next. Yes, I'm next. So this sort of springboarding off a conversation that I had with Rob. I forget in what issue about this regarding whether we want to take web monitoring processing, whose scope has always been ill-defined, and blow it up. So web monitoring processing historically was like the repo for web monitoring stuff. And then we split off the database, which is really the API to the database, the Rails server to the database, as web monitoring DB. And I think we copied, it doesn't really matter, but the UI work in the React app, I think, was also from one of these like drive-by hackathon contributions in February of 2017 that ended up in the UI repo separately. And we sort of maintained a lot of these old contributions in processing in the hope that we might tempt people to come back and help. And I think that ship has sailed, and web monitoring processing has grown into something that's not very well scoped at all. So in this issue that I've linked, right, and Rob says in the chat there are several other UI repos with stuff like that. I don't even know if we've deleted all of them yet. I mean, it's a little bit of an aggressive act to go and delete a contributor's work. And as a project that was trying to grow a community, we tried to err heavily on the side of keeping stuff around that wasn't maintained. And I think we now need to decide that is causing, the cost is outweighing the potential benefits of that strategy at this point. So in that issue, I propose blowing up web monitoring processing into a lot of repos. I'm obviously volunteering to do that work. Is anyone alarmed by this suggestion?
I think I wrote my quick 2 cents, much more conservative response last night. But I'm cool with like whatever the decision is, because either way, I do agree that like there's at least 2 major concerns that we could really benefit from pulling apart there.
Yeah. Part of it is prioritization, right? A lot of this like quality of life, or I don't know, maintenance stuff generally, we were trying to not engage our limited capacity with because we were driving as fast as we could at unplugging Versionista. But I think now that we have a little bit more runway, this kind of activity is reasonable to prioritize. So I guess that's my main question. Is there something to be doing that's more important than this? Or is this a reasonable thing to try and like attack in August?
So you mentioned on the analyst call in chat the sort of ongoing conversation we've had, on and off again conversation we've had, and probably with Brendan also, about like scraping web pages. And as we're looking at IA and seeing the ways in which like that may not work out well, like all the things below about the cost of like attempting to pull in data from IA. Like maybe that is a thing worth prioritizing also. And so that is also like a big fuzzy project that impacts on like priority of like this kind of stuff too. But I think this is much more clear and concrete if we can decide what to do. So it could be quicker to do. I don't know. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there as like a
that's right. I mean,
prioritizing new projects thing.
Has anyone have you talked to Brendan in the last like 6 months about whether Sentry is running? Sentry, the thing that he named Sentry, which is not.
No, but I'm having dinner with him tonight, and I'll probably see him a bunch on Friday. So
okay, it would be interesting to know whether that project is still maintained or he wants it to be maintained, or whatever. Sentry is a independent scraping project which, unlike the Internet Archive scraper, is fully open source. I don't know what else is different about it, but that seems like an important one.
Would
Okay.
the idea be that instead of scraping from Internet Archive, you'd say scrape from Sentry if that project is?
I think it might be both. We don't want to move from being dependent on Versionista to being dependent on IA in the same way, or on any service. Certainly on something as immature as Brendan's project. Wouldn't want to be our exclusive provider. In terms of what's actually plugged in on a given day, maybe we're just drinking from the IA fire hose for a while. But we definitely want to architect this in a way that we could have multiple providers. And the advantage of having one that we built ourselves is that when we have features that we want, we can just make them, presuming we have the development capacity to do it. And now that also gives us a little bit of leverage to come back to IA and say, hey, our scraper does this, and we see that it's useful in the following ways. Maybe your scraper could also do that. And it's a proof of concept.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think maybe the thing I would add to that is that, so like with Versionista, the obvious cost is dollars.
Right.
And sort of the second obvious cost is all the weird ways in which it breaks that we have slowly discovered over time. And then the third obvious cost is Peter Bray complaining all the time and not actually doing the thing. He's like holds out olive leaves, and then when we try and make use of them, he doesn't really follow through. So like that relationship is like, so those are like the issues with Versionista. But with Internet Archive, I think we had the idea that A, they're a little bit more robust, and B, they're like a great public archive, and that would be a better thing to be reliant on. And from that perspective, it is, but the costs we didn't understand well when we first theorized that we understand much better as we've tried to build that integration is they've got a lot of issues in their various APIs that prevent us from being able to pull data out of it as effectively as we do from Versionista, even though we're scraping Versionista, which is horrible. We have actual APIs with Internet Archive, but they have some issues that are very hard for them to resolve that make it hard for us to just say, pull out the updates. Which means that in order to pull data from Internet Archive, we have to pull an extraordinary amount of data versus what we actually want. Which is hard on us and hard on them. And the other thing with Internet Archive is that they're able and very happy to scrape our like list of pages. But whenever we make changes to that list, it's like this whole back and forth. We're going to like have one person make a list of all the changes that we made and pass it over to another person over there. And then they have to put it into their queue of work to do. And then they have to add it. And then then it has to start going. And so like we have to be fastidious about making sure that happens. And B, it's like a little bit of a rigmarole. We can't just manage it ourselves. And C, they have noted that like it's enough stuff at a high enough rate that it has impact on them, and they're happy to be doing it for us, right? But they're like, it's not like this is no big deal. Just put it in. It's like it's a little bit like we feel it slightly, and so there's more burdens than on all sides than I thought we expected. Or than I think we expected. So if we're managing it ourselves, then we don't have to worry about like all the back and forth with third parties. We're also free to like adjust things. We have a really solid understanding of the costs for ourselves. And there's probably not a small likelihood that Internet Archive might be happy to take works that we could export from that work. So that relationship could maybe go the other way around, and it would still be considered a useful part of the public archive. But that's probably farther out, more fuzzy. And then the last thing is the thing that we could do that we can't do now and could sort of do with Internet Archive, but not really effectively, is tie in our monitoring scraping with the type of stuff we've been playing around on the analysis side, where with Sentry, where we can say, can we generate a map of all the pages and links on a website on a monthly or weekly basis, so that we can talk about islanding and the way things disappear or not. And if we can, I mean, that sort of got done with Sentry, sort of, but it's like not totally 100% clear where everything runs or how we manage it. And if we can integrate those things together, then we can have a little bit more control over that. And it also means we can extend to a point where if we get the workflow better, if we get better tools around filtering out dumb changes that we don't need to look at, then we can start saying, instead of just this list, we can just monitor every page at DOI.gov or whatever, which we'll never be able to do effectively with Internet Archive, because they can't effectively target a domain and get all of it, a big domain, and get all of it on that regular basis, because they're trying to do the whole internet, right? And it's easy for us because we can just say, we just care about these domains. And we can do, I mean, I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's feasible for us. Whereas even with more resources, it's infeasible for Internet Archive.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for spelling that out for me.
Yeah, no problem.
That was super useful. How much of that overlaps with what you wanted to talk about in deep concerns about API AI scraping work, which I think is the next topic?
Very little.
All right, go for it.
Did we want to talk more concretely about 206 or?
Is 206 my thing?
Yeah.
Split up. We can try and hash it down on this call if you want. Yeah, I'm willing to. We don't have to reach a consensus right now. I actually was checking my GitHub notifications for an answer on this and didn't see a response because for whatever reason it didn't show up as unread. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't know if you wanted to like continue to hash it out on this call, or you just wanted to
perfectly happy
to and do it on GitHub.
If we can get to a consensus in like 3 minutes, maybe we should try to. So you have no concerns about cleaning up cobwebs. I'm glad we agree about that. Concerns that the IICDX API is enough to be worth publishing. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of mainly what we're creating here is a conversion utility between our schema and their output.
Well, I mean, I think half of that module is a conversion utility, and half of that module is like a small wrapper around the CDX API, which is useful. I'm just not sure if there's enough there that it's like worth publishing as a module. Like, I agree with you on the value of small modules, but even being a like primarily a Node.js person myself, like I think that community has gone way too far in that direction.
Left pad should never get a thing. Okay, I'll concede that point for now. What was my pitch? I don't even remember. So I said something for the CDX API. So you're contending keep the CDX API stuff with the what? Which piece does it belong with?
So I guess what I'm really contending is that I think it's okay for that module, for that package to be like a grab bag toolbox. What should be pulled out of that is the things that aren't like random tools that people do analysis, right? So mainly the diffing service. Because that's the thing that's really like an application that we need to maintain in a more application-y way, rather than like, this is just another tool. And I'm not totally sure on whether the diffing algorithms belong in with the service or in the toolbox. I can, in my head, imagine analysts writing scripts on the research side that might make use of them. But also, I don't think that's really happened practically. I think we've seen the only outside contributions to those diffing algorithms have suffered for not having the algorithms and the service sort of tied together and clear. Right, that was the PDF diff that
Right.
Clearly, we had examples of running, but we're never able to even get the source code of it, the half-working source code of it from the guy, because he just ran into issues and kind of disappeared. I
think
hesitate to put too much blame on that, on the separation of things. I mean, half of it is just on the, like, we asked 50 million times, could you just like put what you've got somewhere so we can see?
Yeah, right. That's a universal problem with flyby contributors.
Yeah.
I would argue that the Python RESTer to our API is something worth maintaining by itself, because if I am an analyst who wants to mess around in a Jupyter notebook, I might want to do like textual analysis on stuff, and the only piece that I actually need is the API to our dataset. And that would give me access to the differs via the API, for what it's worth.
That's true.
All right.
Yeah. I guess my hesitation there again is like, my hesitation with the Internet Archive part is that maybe it's too small, but
yeah,
I can totally be swayed. There, actually all you have to do is say no, and that's fine. Then like we should split it out. If you think it's not too small, like then let's do it. Because that one is, if it's useful, it's broadly useful. I don't know if there's an existing wrapper around CDX.
I looked, I don't know, probably a year ago now, and I didn't find one. We should look again and just contribute to theirs if it exists. But
yeah, and then my like twinned comment with the DB wrapper is, I mean, I think it's big enough to be a thing. It's just not useful to anybody outside us and the analyst team, because that API is not public.
That's right. So I wrote the beginning, the Sphinx documentation published for this stuff, and what I imagine for that I think would be like personally fun for me, and probably fun for other people who have been interested in this stuff, like Eric, would be to create a bunch of examples that use only that RESTer, and then like one-off uses of textual analysis tools, or even just pandas to do analysis on that stuff. So anyway, if you don't have any serious concerns with the split of CDX project, RESTer project, and then diffing server and diffing functions can live together for now, maybe we'll go with that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't have serious concerns. I just wanted to lay out that, like, I think it might be reasonable not to worry about separating those out and just treat them as part of the toolbox, because the toolbox isn't huge and it's like small scope. But like if you think, I really do think they're useful separately, then fine.
Let me make totally sure I understand what you're proposing. So what you're proposing is diffing functions and diffing server in one thing, and Python RESTer and CDX API in another thing.
Yes, and whatever other bits we have floating around in that repo that are actively used or useful. Right. Like still clear out the cobwebs from like the really old, totally unmaintained stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's not crazy to do this in do one step and then see how we feel about it, and then so maybe that's where I'll start. Okay. Next thing was you on IA stuff.
So this was me just trying to lay out the reasons I have not merged that PR about Internet Archive scraping. And I listed out a little bit about this a few minutes ago when I was saying the things we have discovered in starting to work on this with Internet Archive. But to put it concretely, like my concerns about deploying that and starting using it is that it's going to be really high impact on both Internet Archive and us. So first off, we should probably do that issue with recommendations from Internet Archive folks about how to treat them nicer. But the second thing is, like, one major impact issue we know we have is that the way this currently works, we will double hit Internet Archive for every page that we think is potentially a candidate. We'll double hit them for every one that is a valid page, and we'll hit them at least once for every one that's a potential candidate. Because the way the CDX API works, it can't reliably give us a hash for the resolved content, even when you tell it to. So we have to resolve it ourselves and hash it. So we always have to ask for every page that might be a page in the DB. But then the way this process, so the way the Versionista scraper works is once it's pulled it out of Versionista, it preemptively shoves it in S3 and sends all the metadata to the database. And the database goes ahead and says, oh, that S3 bucket I know is an okay safe space that we own. I'm not going to try and re-import that into my canonical bucket. I'm going to say it's fine to just leave it there, and I'll point people over there when they ask for the raw data for this record. With Internet Archive, the way that script is written, it utilizes the standard import process, which nothing that's running in production actually utilizes, which is to send the URL of some external host for that content along with the metadata. And then as part of the import process, the DB server says, that's not a space that I know is owned by us and safe and responsive enough. So I'm going to go out, get it, make sure it matches the hash, and then I'm going to put it in my bucket. Which means when we pull stuff out of Internet Archive, we hit Internet Archive once to pull down all the content and hash it. Then we send the metadata up to the DB, which is going to pull it all down again to archive it. We do, I think, still, I mean, the easy solve to that is to treat Internet Archive as a safe space for this stuff and not re-download it. My concern with that is that, like, for some of this stuff, Internet Archive can be super slow. And analysts have specifically noted how it's helpful that our stuff is not that slow. So I would like to put it in a bucket. So I think maybe this script needs to evolve to be more like the Versionista scraper and preemptively put things in the bucket. The problem is that we're dealing with so many pages. We have to be smarter about doing it. There was a brief period of time where I was dumb about how Versionista stuff gets bucketed, and then it cost me $1,000 that month. So I fixed that dumbness, but it's harder to make the Internet Archive part that smart. What we need to do is kind of keep an index of all the hashes so we know not to re-upload something with the same hash. Because unlike Versionista, where we're just going to upload the timestamps, that's infeasible with Internet Archive, because Internet Archive has a new record for every page every day, right? So that's 30,000 records a day, versus Versionista only has a new record when it's changed. So what we need to do with the Internet Archive stuff is content address them and store them under their hashes. And then we need to keep an index of all the hashes we have so that we know we don't need to upload this one because we already have the hash. We could avoid the index if we make a GET request to Internet Archive or to S3, but if we make a GET request to S3 to see if we already have something stored under that hash, but that could still be expensive compared to just one index that we store. Right. It's an order of magnitude cheaper to do a GET than to put data up there, but it's still, for every 10 of those, like, it costs us. So probably keep an index. So that's the thing, like, I'd have to do there, and that's why it's more complicated.
And that would live in the DB, presumably, in the Postgres with everything else.
I think the dumb and easy way to do it would be to have it live in S3, like just as a giant text file or JSON file. That's just here's the list of all the hashes on here. And every so often, if we want to, we can, rather than add to it and put it back, we can regenerate the whole list by scanning through S3. It's just that I tried that experimentally, scanning through all the Versionista records to list them, and it takes a long time. So I don't think it's going to be possible to do the naive version, which would be to start the scrape by scanning S3 for the list of all the hashes.
Sure.
Yeah. So we could keep it in DB, but I think, like, the easier, dumber thing would be to just have an index file in S3 that's just like, here's a list of all the files, aka a list of all the hashes.
Fair enough. If it's fast enough, then fair enough.
Yeah. I think that would be the way to go there. And then The other part is that like this is going to incur a lot of import processing. Maybe that's fine. So like I noted this as less severe, but it will be a lot. And so we could not worry about it first, turn it on and see how it goes. It's definitely something that we'll want to improve overall. I think the question is whether it will be immediately super painful or whether it will be okay, just not great. And so how important it is to do remediation around that. So like two approaches I thought about is we could query the API for every sort of candidate page that we have to see what its latest hash is before adding it to our set of metadata to send to the importer. But that may be actually incurring just as much work on the database just through the API rather than in a worker script that's immediately that's talking directly with the database, which would actually be a faster, lower impact place to put it. so that may not be very useful. And I haven't thought fully through that to think through if that's true, but I think it might be. And then the other one would be to keep a list somewhere or to start just by querying the DB for a list of every URL that we're tracking and the latest hash of each of those URLs. I think we start with something similar to that query to get a list of all the domains to begin with. So it may not be too big a deal to start with that query. My only concern there is that as we increase the set of pages, just the amount of memory to store that list in working memory in order to do comparisons for everything we pull from IA could get big. But we could probably use a Bloom filter for that. We couldn't use a Bloom filter for the hashes part, but we could use a Bloom filter for saying, is this URL even one that we want to send to the DB? And that would reduce memory a lot. We couldn't do that for hashes because Bloom filters have false positives, but not false negatives. So anyway, those are my thoughts there. And those are like not tiny amounts of work. And there's a bunch of them are probably really important before putting this script into production at a rate that is like seriously trying to handle all 30,000 pages that we have in the database every day from Internet Archive.
Right. I wanted to surface comments from Jason in the chat. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, so my thoughts, so I love generally, I've been mostly just staying quiet here because I'm not so familiar with the infrastructure yet. But I do love dumb file storage, especially when you think you're going to be doing something big. Like that's a great that's a great strategy to start with, and then only walk away from that as far as you have to. But yeah, my initial thought about this was using an Nginx caching proxy. I've done something kind of similar to this before, where basically I was just caching the whole thing, headers and all, in a, Nginx likes to actually do things by hierarchical hash directory storage. So that can also be a nice, cheap, lightweight way to keep things for a relatively short amount of time. If you think most of these requests are happening, if those follow-up snapshot gets are happening, within, say, I don't know, a day of that initial hash request, that could be a good temporal storage. And then you just basically point it at the Nginx proxy, and it would either serve it up locally or go get it if it doesn't have it.
That sounds awesome. I think we're suffering slightly from the fact that the DB API is still being hosted, the production one, as opposed to the staging one, which is one of the problem, is still being hosted on Heroku. So we're not able to put something in the middle very easily like that. And it is also suffering from time and lack of expertise. So if you have the expertise and you are the person who is increasing our time by a third, awesome. I would it would be great if you wanted to look into that. Sounds good. Gretchen?
This might be like an order of magnitude issue where this would not help at all, but is there a reason that the requests are being made every day when the analysts look at, like a week, like on a kind of a week time scale? Maybe we could go down by, 7 times the amount of requests if we did it weekly instead of daily.
So the reason it is that way is that I think when I asked the Internet Archive folks if they could do this for us, and they said, sure, and they started doing it, I said, our ideal would be daily because that's what we have Versionista trying to do. But it wouldn't be a big deal if you could only do it weekly. And they said, no problem, we'll do it daily. And since then, I have repeatedly said, as we've bumped it up, and I'm like, no problem if you want to back off the time scale as an exchange for the number of pages. And they're like, yeah. And so I think they might do that if I explicitly said, please back off the time scale. But otherwise, like, this is again that like 2 steps removed. Like, we have to ask a person to do a thing that then takes effect a day or 2 or 3 later. Like, we don't have direct control to twiddle any knobs and say, like, just do this every 5 days. So, like, we can ask for that, and that will lower this impact somewhat if they did that. So that's a good point. I didn't think about. I had only been thinking about that from the perspective of impact on Internet Archive. I had not been thinking about it from the perspective of impact on Internet Archive coming back to impact on us. So yeah, maybe I should ask them if they could just back it off. I think the other, the original viewpoint also was that we wanted the data as granularly as possible. But yeah, if it makes it much more feasible to do everything, if we make it less granular, then.
But
Yes.
there is something valuable, even if we catch it later, of like when it goes into the Washington Post or something, saying on January 18th this changed, whatever. But
Yeah, when we have the daily data, then we don't have to worry about those situations where we're like, oh, this changed sometime between June 20th and July 16th. We can just say it changed on this day. I mean, we can't say what hour, but we can get pretty specific.
And especially when these things become intermittently unavailable, it gives us better data on if something changes and changes back. Most likely it comes down and comes back. That resolution becomes important. Okay. I think that's the end of the agenda, unless it changed in real time underneath me. It did not. So I think we have plenty of action items tracked on GitHub. Is there anything particular we want to make sure that we keep track of out of this meeting?
Jason is doing the allowed archive host docs, which would be great to finally have written out somewhere. And that it's a priority to resolve the questions, or I guess it's resolved and you just need to do the work around breaking apart processing, Dan?
Oh, wait, how does that relate to the allowed archive hosts? Oh,
it doesn't.
Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to think through action items.
Yeah.
What did we resolve there?
I'm gonna go ahead and blow that up into separate repos.
Okay.
I'll do it in the way that you prefer, because that is either a reasonable stopping point or a reasonable path on the way that I still currently prefer. Cool. Anything else? Gretchen?
What are the kinds of things that that y'all would want me to bring to this meeting in terms of like analyst updates, or anything else? Like what sorts of things are you looking for? What would be most useful?
I would say, oh, go ahead, Bob.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's right. I was staring into space. You go.
Okay. I think the big things are to be able to summarize issues that analysts have been running into, or more deeply explicate like issues that are on Slack, or to talk about issues that aren't on Slack but have come up in the meetings or whatever. Because I try and make about every other analyst meeting. Not everybody else makes it as frequently. Some people more, some people less. I don't think it's ever going to be frequent that all the dev folks are able to be on the analyst call like they were this past Monday. That was a surprise event. And so stuff like that, festering confusion around duplication in the spreadsheets. Really, that is something that we should have figured out from the analyst representative here. But I'm glad we finally got it figured out. But stuff like that, I think, is the biggest thing. And then in general, because not everybody here is there, like just a general, like broad shape of like, hey, we publish these reports, or like we're really focusing on these pages right now, or whatever. I don't know. So people have a sense of what's going on both sides.
Right.
I think that's totally makes sense, Rob. And I would also say the thing similarly with the steering committee being a conduit between goings on with the steering committee and this group, so that it will be rare, I think, for all the developers to be able to attend the steering committee meeting as well. Just because also it's like all the contributors' time is very valuable. And so, an hour in the meeting is an hour they're not, working on the tool. So, occasion, if there's those all edgy meetings where everyone is there to sort of give updates, maybe, once a month or something, but, weekly, I don't think it, I think their time is much more used better working rather than attending like the steering committee meeting or the all edgy meeting or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the caveat is also making sure there's communication between us and the steering committee too, because I know there's been an issue in the past as well.
Right. I feel like when at the very beginning, there were just weekly calls with everyone. And as things have become more separated, like I never see Michelle or Dawn anymore. So hearing like what's going on edgy wide is valuable to me as a person who prioritizes this call, if I can only make one call a week. So don't hesitate to sort of say things that would be redundant to people who are reading everything on Slack, because I don't think all of us are reading everything on Slack. I guess I just underlined Rob's point about it's always nice to hear about reports and about the work having an impact. I don't always track all of that. And it's nice to hear about, if you can take a step back and try to think of these forest through the trees issue, like the one that came up on Monday. I think we're pretty good at knowing pain points about like this page has this rendering error and that's a bug that we can fix. But sort of the wish list of the grand stuff, sometimes something that seems like a big ask is actually a simple change, and there's just a disconnect in terms of our understanding of the needs. That's probably the most valuable thing that can be brought, in my opinion. So mindful of the time, maybe we should shut it down. Any final comments? All right. Always good to see you all. Oh, Jason.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think I'll have more to say next week.
Yeah, no, listening is a great place to start. Thank you for coming. Yeah. All right. Take care, friends.
Good to see all of you.
Good to see everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.